Welcome to this tutorial where we are going to talk about the requirements and how to connect a Mitel 69 series phone to Mitel Mivoice Business. So the 69 series phones are, an example is the ones that are displaying now. It could be a 6905, it could be a 6910, it could be a 692030 or 6950. It will be a 6970 for all we care, but I'm going to demonstrate to you the network requirements and how we get it to connect to Mivoice Business and to have it working. So we are basically concentrating on the phone itself and the network. We are not going to get onto the Mivoice Business and talk about the settings or the configurations or the parameters that we need to change on Mivoice Business. We are just focusing on the phone itself and the network to get it to get the phone talking to Mivoice Business. So let's continue. So we take it that we've got our Mivoice Business controller. It should be up and running and connected in the network. So for example, we are going to have our Mivoice Business controller. Let me come here and choose a color here. Let's use red. So here, for example, this is our MIVB. Let's say we've got our Mivoice Business controller, which has an IP address of 192.168.1.2, which is the default IP address. So let's say we haven't changed it, and we've got our network switch. This is our network switch. So our network switch preferably should support PoE, which is power over Ethernet, and in our example we are using a Cisco switch. So you can use any other switch as long as it supports PoE, and probably if you are going to do things like VLANs, you probably need a switch that supports VLANs, which means you need a managed switch, but that is optional. A switch being managed is optional but preferred. And you are going to have your Mitel IP phone. This phone should be running on MyNet firmware. Which is the default out of the box. And when you open this phone and take it out of the box, it will be on default. It is blank. So we are going to power on your Mivoice Business controller, and you are going to come and connect it onto the switch. And then before we connect our phone to the switch, we have to ensure that the network has a working DHCP. Has a working DHCP server. Very important. We need to have a working DHCP server in the network, and that DHCP server should be able to assign number 1 IP address to the phone, and subnet mask and the default gateway, and number 2, most importantly, it should be able to offer option 125 to the phone. So option 125 contains number one, it contains IP address of call server, IP address of call server, and the call server being equal to Mivoice Business. And in our case, it will be an IP address of 192.168.1.2. And number two, our DHCP server should be able to in that option 125, number two, we should have a IP address of the TFTP server. And in our case, our TFTP server is hosted, it's co-located in Mivoice Business, which makes our TFTP server IP address to be also 192.168.1.2, which is the same IP address as Mivoice Business. So the TFTP server's function is to hold the firmware for the phone, and when the phone boots up, when it notices this IP address in option 125, when it has accepted the IP address, is going to check the firmware that it is running on, the firmware version on this phone, against the firmware version that it sees in the TFTP server. If the TFTP server has a higher version than the firmware version currently on the phone is going to upgrade to the version that is in the TFTP server. If the version in the TFTP server happens to be lower than the version that is currently on the phone is going to ignore that version in the TFTP server and continue to operate with the firmware that it already has. So DHCP, which we have said is very important that we must have a DHCP server on our network. DHCP server can be run on Mivoice Business, which means the DHCP server can be inside Mivoice Business controller. We can enable DHCP server here and then assign option 125 to the DHCP pool, to the scope of the DHCP server. We can then assign our option 125 there, or a DHCP server can be external, which means we can also connect a DHCP server into the network, which means this will be an external DHCP server. And an example of an external DHCP server will be your Windows, maybe 2019 DHCP server. It could be a firewall. For instance, you can talk about FortiGate. Or it could be on a router, for example, a Cisco router. But it is recommended that if you are not going to enable your DHCP on Mivoice Business itself, you would rather run it on a Windows server and not on any other device like a firewall or a router, for the simple reason that these other devices cannot support option 125 as an ASCII format. It has to be an ASCII format, and it is only supported on a Windows server and inside the Mivoice Business. If you are to configure option 125 on the file, for instance, for example, or on the router, you are not going to be able to make it an ASCII option 125, and it's not going to be able to work. It's not going to work. So eventually you are going to end up using what they call options. You are going to end up what they call option 128 plus, which is a combination of different different options being combined to form an option. But this is not a preferred way of running your DHCP. So for now, let's just stick to Windows Server or Mivoice Business where necessary. I have cleaned the board. So let's assume now we have unpacked our phone and we are going to connect this phone to the switch. Because our switch is PoE, which is preferred. We prefer our switch to be PoE. If we don't have a switch with PoE, we are then going to have to power this phone with an external power adapter, where we are going to connect these two to power, to mains, to electricity, and then we plug it to the back of the phone there to power up the phone. Then we take an Ethernet cable, which we are going to connect at the back of the phone onto the switch. As soon as we do this, the phone is going to power up, and this screen right now is off. The screen is going to turn on. So once the screen turns on, the first thing that this phone is going to do is to wait for network. Remember, the network takes about some seconds to come up, because there is some handshake happening between the device and the switch. There's a period of almost maybe 60 to 90 seconds before you start seeing lights showing on the switch. Not to go much into the details of what will be happening, but you just know that the network doesn't come up immediately. The first thing that the phone does is to negotiate power, if at all it's going to use PoE switch, and then once it gets its power rating, it's going to switch on. So the first thing that is going to wait for power, for network. So when the network comes up, the phone is going to it is lit up on the display, and it's going to write waiting for network. Then once the network comes up, it's going to say waiting for layer 2 data. So this layer 2 data, it is when the phone is using LLDP, Link Layer Discovery Protocol, or CDP in the Cisco world, to confirm the VLAN that it is going to operate in, which means it is waiting for the VLAN ID from the switch port where it is connected. If there was a VLAN configured on the switch, this one is going to be told what VLAN ID to use. If there is no VLAN, the absence of VLAN is going to be VLAN none. Without going much into details about VLAN 1 being equal to the data VLAN, which is probably where the default VLAN, the absence of VLAN will mean VLAN 1, which is where your PCs will operate on. And also there's a VLAN 0, which some people debate. There's a school of thought to say there's no VLAN 0, and also there's a school of thought that say VLAN 0 exists, and VLAN 0 is the default for voice. But this is a topic for another day. Let's not delve much into that. Let's just say there was no VLAN configured on the switch, therefore the phone is going to be told that your VLAN is none. So when the VLAN is none, it falls into the default VLAN, which is VLAN 1. So which means now the next thing is just going to use that VLAN, that ID that it got from the switch, to send a broadcast message, which is a DHCP discovery, discovery message. So you must go and look into DHCP and study on your own the DHCP process, the DORA, which is the discover, offer, request, accept. So right now the first thing is that it is going to send a discovery message, which is this D. So it's a broadcast that it sends onto the network, onto the LAN, and then it goes out to all the devices that are connected to say this phone is asking who is the DHCP server on this network. In our example, we are going to assume a scenario where our DHCP server is an external DHCP server, which is probably means we are using a Windows server, Windows machine. So if this DHCP server, it should also have an IP address. Maybe it is 192.168.1.10, probably for this example. This DHCP server is going to receive this discovery message. It is saying who is the DHCP here. It is going to respond with an offer, which is this O. It is going to say I am the DHCP server on this network. There could be 3 DHCP servers for all we care, but ideally in a network it should have 1 DHCP server per subnet. Each subnet should have its own, just one, not so many, because it leads to competition and conflicts. And probably, depending on the device, it might end up accepting an IP address from the first offer and rejecting the second offer. Probably the second offer is coming from the DHCP that would have wanted the phone to accept an IP address from. For example, you might have a DHCP server with a 192 network, and probably another DHCP server with a 172 network, and you want your phone to be in 172 network, and the 192 DHCP server gave its offer before the 172, and then the phone would then accept 192 but then fail to connect to 172 where it should actually have belonged. So just know this rule of thumb is to say only 1 DHCP server per network, only DHCP server per subnet. So always remember this. So the DHCP server is going to respond to say I am the DHCP server, but it says I am a DHCP server by offering an IP address, subnet mask, default gateway, and other options that you might have configured for that scope in the DHCP, which could be, so a DHCP server will have a scope and a pool. A scope contains the subnet and options. So the subnet will be probably 192.168.1.0, which is /24, and it's going to have some options. The options will be number 1, subnet mask, number 2, the default gateway, in some instance number 3 will have the DNS server. We shall do another video where we explain what is a DNS server and what does DNS server do. And number 4, important for our Mitel IP phone, will be option 125. So the default gateway is also, and the DNS server, those are also DHCP options I will just let you know now what their option numbers are. So option 125. So the default gateway is represented by option number 3 in the DHCP scope. It is and the DNS server is option number 6. And our Mitel option, the one that we want for our phones, is option 125. And we have mentioned why option 125 is important for our phone, because it tells the phone what is the IP address of the call server, which is the MIVB, which is 192. And it also tells our phone what is the TFTP server IP address. TFTP server IP address. And we can also, in the option 125, we can also include a VLAN ID for the phone. If the phone was going to sit in a separate VLAN ID, we could also include that in our option 125. So option 125 is very, very important, very critical for the call server IP address and the TFTP IP address. If the phone receives a DHCP offer from a DHCP server that only includes a subnet mask and an IP address, a subnet mask, a default gateway, and a DNS server, all the good stuff, but without a option 125, the phone is going to reject that offer. That offer gets rejected, and the phone keeps sending out discovery messages into the network to try and find a DHCP offer which has option 125 in it. So this part is very important to note, that once there is no option 125, the phone gets stuck on waiting for DHCP. It gets stuck on point number 2, waiting for DHCP. So let's say in our case, the phone was told that your IP address is going to be, let me change this to blue. Your IP address is going to be 192.168.1.11. Your subnet mask is going to be /24. Your default gateway is going to be 192.168.1.1. Your MIVB that you are going to report to is 192.168.1.2. Your TFTP server is going to be again 192.168.1.2. The phone is going to accept this IP address, is going to grab it and send a request to say, I request that one, please give it to me. Remember, I said these steps are this: discover, offer, request, accept. And the DHCP is going to accept, and then it's going to accept and start using the. Okay, let's take a step back so that this sinks in before we continue. A DHCP offer, especially when it concerns our Mitel phone, should have, number 1, an IP address which goes along with the subnet mask, and a subnet mask. And number 2, it should have a default gateway, which we say is option 3. It should have optional DNS server, DNS server IP address, which we said is option 6. This is optional. This is not a must. It's optional, very optional. Number 4, which is very important, is option 125 for the reasons that I have mentioned. So when this address is offered, it should have what we call a lease time. So this lease time is used to determine for how long the phone is going to use that IP address. For example, we have said our phone has been offered 192.168.1.11, but it is going to be told if it's going to use this for 10 minutes, for 1 hour, for 3 days, for 2 weeks, for 1 month, for a year, or whatever. This is a configurable period. You are the one who configures it in your DHCP server for how long you want the phone to keep the IP address. So the phone, as long as it is up and it has not been disconnected from the network, if it gets in this IP address 192.168.1.11 and the lease time is saying 1 year, for example, this phone, as long as it is switched on, it is going to continue to say my IP address is .11 and is not going to ask for an IP address until a year later. And also the DHCP pool on the DHCP server is going to also keep this IP address reserved. It's not going to offer it to any other device for a year. So if you have a DHCP server which had a pool of probably, let's say, 200 IPs, and you have set your DHCP server release time to 1 year, and if you connect 200 devices on one day, on the same day, you have exhausted your IP addresses and all your devices have been told to renew their lease after 1 year. And the DHCP server goes and ticks in the pool to say, oh, these IP addresses, I have assigned them. I will only assign them after 1 year. Then this is 1 January when you plug all your phones. You have plugged all your phones on 1 January. So which means the DHCP server is only going to reissue again these IP addresses probably on 31 December. But let's say on 10 January, you decide you've got one phone that breaks. It falls from the table. So you have your DHCP with a lease time of 1 year with 200 IP addresses. And on 1 January, you connect 200 devices. And you have exhausted your IPs. So which means the DHCP server is only going to try and reassign these IPs again on 31 December. But on 10 January, probably at the workshop for this company where our installation is at the workshop, where there were 10 phones, there was a fire and all the 10 phones, they got burnt. Then on the 11th of January, we come with 10 new phones. When we plug these phones into the network, we are going to see that the phones are going to get stuck at waiting for DHCP, because you have made your lease to be 1 year. So you have to now go into your DHCP server and release these IP addresses so that they can be reallocated to your new devices. But if you are using a Windows server, for example, and you are not a Windows guy, so you will then need to rely on somebody who knows Windows, or the IT personnel for that company to go and do that for you. If they are not available, then you might have to wait and appoint. So the takeaway from this is, it's not recommended to make your lease time 1 year. And I've come across somewhere where somebody made their DHCP list to be 10 seconds. And the result of this was that the phones would try to re-establish, to request their IP address in the middle of a call. And the call will stop for a while, then there will be no audio. So ideally, in my case, I would suggest that you put your list to 7 days and make it coincide with a Sunday, maybe, when the offices are closed. And then on a Sunday, that's when your phones can renew their lease. So if you can't make your list to be 7 days, at least make it 30 days, which is equal to 1 month. I suggest you don't go beyond a month. I've seen some, they prefer 3 months. But again, you might exhaust your IPs in 3 months, and then before the 3 months elapses, you need to maybe change your phone, because so much can happen to phones in 3 months, wear and tear and so forth. And then you might want to replace a phone, and you find that your pool is exhausted, and yet you still need to connect a phone to replace a dead phone. But anyway, it's still possible. As long as you have access to a DHCP server, you can always go and release an IP address so that it is available for your device. Now back to here, where our phone is accepted, is requested for this, and then it is accepted. So I feel like I should again explain the DORA. We've got our IP phone sending a discovery message into the network to say who is the DHCP server here. Then we've got an offer from the DHCP server itself saying, I am the DHCP server here. Here are the IP addresses that I want to give you. Here are the details of the IP address that I want to give you and its options. And then we've got the phone seeing what has been offered and agreeing with it, and sending a request to say, yes, I'm requesting for that, I want it, I'm taking it, I'm going to use it. This is from the phone. I'll put directions here. This is from the phone, this is from the phone, this is from the DHCP server. This is our DHCP server in this direction, and this is our phone in this direction. And then we've got the DHCP server sending an acknowledgement to say, okay, I've acknowledged that you want that IP address. I am going to tick it on my list to say this IP now belongs to you. So the phone is going to, it has now been given this IP address 192 192.168.1.11, and it has been told that your Mivoice Business IP address is 192.168.1.2 and your TFTP server is 192.168.1.2 through that option 125. Is going the next step is going to go to that TFTP server and check for the firmware version that is stored in the TFTP server. For example, if the TFTP server is version 1.1 and this phone had version 1.0, it's going to say, okay, TFTP server, your version is higher than mine, can I please have it? And the TFTP server is going to say, that's fine, you can have it, and the phone is going to download. It's going to download from the TFTP server. It's going to download the firmware. And when it is done downloading the firmware, it's going to install the firmware and it's going to upgrade itself to version 1.1. Suppose the phone went and checked with the TFTP server and saw that the phone is on version 1.0 and the firmware server is version 1.0. The phone compares, it sees that these firmwares are the same. It's not going to take any action. It's just going to say it's not going to download this phone. Then it's going to ignore and it's going to continue with the boot process. If at all it decided to download the firmware and upgrade itself, it's going to upgrade to itself up to a point where its firmware version and the firmware version in the TFTP server are the same, which brings us to this scenario where the firmware servers, the firmware versions are the same. And then the next thing now, after it has compared versions and it is satisfied that we are on the same version with the TFTP server, is going to now move to the MIVB using the IP address that it got from option 125, and is going to register itself with the MIVB. And depending on whether the MAC address of this phone, its MAC address, if it was already assigned in the configuration of this phone on Mivoice Business, this phone is going to register and connect and go into a working state. And it will go into a working state being idle, into an idle working state. But if the MAC address is not found in the configurations on Mivoice Business, the phone is going to display PIN. This is an attempt for it to manually send its MAC address to the Mivoice Business, so that Mivoice Business can capture that MAC address and enter it against the extension number that you would prefer that phone to be. So the PIN is normally going to be a set registration code followed by the extension number that you want the phone to be, and we are going to submit. Once you do that, the Mivoice Business is going to see this MAC address and put it under the extension that you would have put after the set registration code. If maybe your set registration code is 123 and the extension number is 2001, Mivoice Business is going to take the MAC address of that phone that you have done this on and put it against extension configuration, the configuration for extension 2001, and then the phone transitions into an idle working state. Okay, before we continue, let us recap. We said DHCP can either exist on the Mivoice business on Mitel itself, or it can be an external. Can be an external DHCP server like this. Either way, we said we must only have one working DHCP. You can't have DHCP enabled on Mivoice business and then have it enabled also external, unless if you are going to split your IPs. If you are going to split your subnet, say maybe 192.168.1.1 up to maybe 155, they are going to form a pool here, and 192.168.1.156 up to maybe 253 are going to form a pool in this external Windows server. And then you know that your IP phones, when they send out a discovery, they are going to see option 125 on this one, and this one will not have option 125. It won't be there. Then it follows that if this phone receives an offer from the external DHCP server first, because of the absence of option 125, is going to reject and continue sending discovery messages until this one replies. Probably is going to be the second offer, and because of the presence of option 125, is going to accept, and then it will then use the IP addresses that are on the DHCP for Mivoice business. Or ideally you can have your DHCP server enabled on the Mitel Mivoice business with probably a subnet of 192.168.1x subnet, which is probably, yes, just in layman terms, coming onto the switch. And then we are going to assign it a voice VLAN. Probably we say this is VLAN ID number 10. And then we are going to have our phone also connecting to the switch, and then it is tagged for VLAN 10. And then we might have a computer connecting from the back of the phone. This is a computer, and the computer will be in VLAN, let's say 20. And we can have an external DHCP server here. This is external DHCP server with a pool for 192.168.1.2.x in layman terms, which we shall say is a data or a PC VLAN, which you can give an ID of 20. And then we are going to come and connect our server here. So the configuration is such that because the PC is sitting in VLAN 20, when it sends a broadcast for an IP address, it's going to send the broadcast in the VLAN 20, and it's going to go through the phone, but the phone will not hear that because they are not on the same VLAN. It's going to go onto the switch, and then it's going to go into VLAN 20, and it's going to come out only the discovery is only going to be heard by the DHCP server here. It's not going to reach here because they are in different VLAN. If the phone itself sends a discovery, because it's in VLAN 10, it's going to come like this, and it's going to go like this, and it's only going to be heard on the Mivoice Business only. But this port where we are connecting our Mitel has to be configured to untag VLAN 10, and this port where we are plugging our external DHCP should untag VLAN 20. And our PCs should also untag VLAN 20, but our phones would tag VLAN 10. So without going into details about VLANs at high level, probably if you so wish, you can request that you can do a proper video on VLANs, and I can also be giving you sample configurations on the switch, which port is configured how. And I can also go into showing you what is the configuration of the switch port, what should be configured on the switch port to support VLANs. Okay, let's do a demonstration of where we've got one of these phones. We plug it into the network. The first thing that it's going to do is going to wait for the network to come up, and this is what will display on its screen. On this display will show waiting for network, and then it's going to go into waiting for LL layer 2 data, which is your LLDP or CDP, where it is trying to identify the voice VLAN that it should operate in from the switch port. And then once it's got that detail, which VLAN is going to be operating in, whether it's the absence of a VLAN or it has been given a certain VLAN ID number, it is then going to send out discovery message into the network. When it is saying waiting for DHCP like this, it is sending discovery messages into the network, and it is waiting for an offer from any present DHCP server. So once a DHCP server sends an offer, for example, this phone has been offered 192.168.1.10 and the subnet mask, and then this phone is going to request, is going to agree to say, okay, I want that phone, I want that IP address, and then it sends a request message to the DHCP server. Then the DHCP server is going to acknowledge, and the VLAN, it was none. There was no VLAN which was communicated from the switch. So this phone has gotten an IP address from the default VLAN, and then now the IP address in this case, the offer that came from the DHCP server in this case had a Mivoice Business IP address. It had a TFTP server IP address, which means to say it had option 125. Therefore the phone accepted it, and now it has gone to the TFTP server to check for the software version. So this is the debug mode for the phone. When the phone is booting up, when it shows the task bar, this bar which is written 95%, it starts off as being empty. It will be just white. There will be, let's say it's 0%. If you press onto the red button on the phone, which is the hang up key or the reject key, it will then go into what we call the debug mode, where instead of showing you percentages and showing you information in this format, it's going to show you in a listed format. It's going to show you the steps that it is going through. like waiting for network, waiting for layer 2 data, waiting for DHCP. Then it got this offer from the DHCP server 172.19. Then it accepted it, and then this is the information that it was given. It was given the DNS server, then the VLAN was none. Then it went to the TFTP server, which the IP address was that one, 192.168.2.40. Then it checked for the firmware. Then the firmware was the same. Then it's saying upgrade main field, continuing boot up, starting services. Then it is contacting the Mivoice Business server. If it reaches it, then it's going to go into a working state. Or if the Mivoice Business is not reachable, it's going to get stuck on contacting server. Okay, let's say now everything is what it should be. The phone will eventually go into an idle working state. This is an example of an idle phone which is in a working state. Suppose we did not have a DHCP server in our network completely. Let's have a look at a scenario where we never had a working phone. Let us say we've connected our Mivoice Business, it is up and running. We also have our phone, but we don't have a DHCP server enabled on Mivoice Business. It's not enabled at all. It's not there. I'll put an X. We didn't do that. We can rely on an external DHCP server. But either we also don't have it, or we have it but it is missing option 125. It is missing option 125 probably because it is a firewall and we have no means of putting the option 125 ASCII there. Or it is probably because it's a router, or probably because it is probably maybe a layer 3 switch. For whatever reason, we don't have option 125. So this phone is going to get to be stuck in waiting for DHCP. So once our phone boots up and it goes into waiting for DHCP, we can then click on the settings button. So the settings button is a button which looks like this. They say it's a cogwheel. It's the symbol of a cogwheel. A cogwheel is something like this. This is not a star, this is not an asterisk, but it's a cogwheel. And then we are going to go into advanced settings. And then it's going to ask you for a password or a PIN, which is going to be 73738. And then you are going to go to the network settings for IPv4. So once we go into the static network settings for IPv4, because we don't have a DHCP server, let's say number one, we don't have a DHCP server completely. If you don't have a DHCP server completely, we are now going to assign an IP address to this phone here. Say .1.11. The subnet mask, let's say it's this one. and then we are going to assign a IP address. Okay, let's just say this one is 0 and 0, just so that we are on the same subnet with what is already entered for the Mivoice Business IP address. And TFTP IP address. And then we are of course going to save, and the phone is going to boot up and is going to go through that process where it's not going to request for DHCP anymore, because it already has an IP address. So what will it need a DHCP request for? Nothing, right? So it's not going to go through that step. It's going to ignore that step, and it's going to connect to the TFTP server, confirm the firmware version that is on this TFTP server against the TFTP server that is on this phone. If the TFTP server has a higher version, it's then going to download and upgrade it itself. If the versions are the same, then it's going to go to Mivoice Business, this IP address, and get itself registered there, depending on whether its MAC address was already configured against an extension. It will then come up with that extension number in a working state, or if it doesn't, the Mivoice Business doesn't have the MAC address of this phone assigned to any extension in its database, this phone is going to display PIN. Now, let's say we've got a DHCP server, but it doesn't have option 125. DHCP server present. But without option 125. So which means this DHCP server is going to offer IP address 192.168.0.11, and is going to tell this phone the subnet mask. It's going to tell it the default gateway. But because this offer does not have option 125, because this is what we call option 125, because we said it's not there, this phone will reject this information. It will reject. But for us to make this phone not to reject this offer from the DHCP, so that it accepts this IP address from the DHCP, we then have to manually come here and enter an IP address here and here. So when the phone sees this offer of these IP addresses here, and it looks on the settings where it's supposed to enter details from option 125, and it sees that already it has been told what is your call server IP address, what is your TFTP server IP address, it therefore does not have no need for an option 125 in a DHCP offer. So therefore it stops to listen and accept only a DHCP offer that is option 125, because it already knows. So what it is only missing is an IP address. So in that scenario, the phone is now going to accept these IPs. It's no longer going to reject, it's going to accept, on the basis that it has been configured with a Mivoice Business IP address already and a TFTP server IP address already, but manually by the installer. So take note of this. If you have a DHCP server that does not have an option 125 in it, you must manually go and enter these details. and leave this part blank. And leave this part blank so that it is filled in by the DHCP. But make sure you enter this. Then your phone would boot up and complete and go either into a working state or go into the request for PIN. I hope that this is all. I hope this has been informative for you and you've enjoyed the tutorial. Thank you. Until we meet again, please share, like and subscribe. For any comments, please send those comments through. I will respond. If you have any requests, also send them through via comments. Thank you and bye.